recording. Yeah. Cool. So for anyone who's watching the recording, we started recording a little bit late, but we have just been setting up a project folder and we have a very basic example of some HTML. Cool. I mentioned a few minutes ago that we skipped some stuff. So this is not really a proper HTML file because we don't have the HTML tag and the top and all that stuff. What I suggest is just Googling for HTML5. I don't know, maybe doc type is enough. Maybe that's just it. No, actually this is a full structure. So you can see this is the basic structure of an HTML document. First we have this doc type tag that actually looks a little bit different than most others because it has like this exclamation mark. But this is just and you basically this is just telling us that this is the modern type of HTML, because you could choose to use something that's called HTML, XHTML, right?
Yeah.
And is there a version on it or something? I haven't done that for years. This is generally what you use when you use HTML5, which is modern CSS. So that's what the first line tells us. That's the version of HTML that we're using. Then we have a starting tag here, HTML, and an ending tag, end HTML, right? And then we have a head tag, and everything that's inside the head tag you won't actually see in your browser because it's stuff that's telling something about the page. So that's what we call metadata. Except that there's the title part here. Here it's just called title of the document. The way you can see the title is that you can see it up here on the tab in your browser in top. Then after the head section, then the body section starts. And the body section is all the stuff that you will actually see in your browser. So yeah, so if we take this stuff here and try to copy it into the document that we did before. I don't know if you manage to find the same so you can copy paste it, otherwise you can write it off my screen now. Maybe if I this way, so you know you can't see the URL like that. So you can see how to find the URL, or you can just type it out. It's up to you. Okay, my editor is a little bit confused because I moved the file manually. So I just want to make sure that it's being saved to the right place. So this is where I want it. Yep. Do you have this structure now? Cool. And I just want to keep an eye on the learning goals in the repository, so I know that we're doing the right things. Okay. So we should be talking about the division of labor between HTML and CSS. I think we need to show you properly what HTML is before we do that. So can you remind me to get back to that?
Yeah, I will.
Cool. So I already given you a little bit of introduction to the tags themselves, what an HTML tag looks like, and we've been talking a little bit about indentation. Indentation is how you do like this when you're structuring your document. So the indentation here is actually not completely correct. So title should be indented, and this entire head section should be indented a little bit. And I use, when I select some text, and then I use the tabulator tab key to indent stuff. Yeah. So this looks right. You can see the HTML tag starts here and ends there, and the head tag starts there, ends there, body there, like that, right? So that's the indentation. Then it says here that we need to talk about something about parents and children. So maybe someone who has a little experience with HTML, or maybe someone who can guess, can tell me what that might mean, parents and children in HTML.
Parent tag and the parent tag and the child tag is a tag that comes underneath that.
Okay, so the child tag is inside the parent tag. Okay, so do we have an example of that here?
Body, yeah, the main is HTML and then head is child of HTML, or title is child of.
Yeah, so HTML is parent to head. So head is a child of HTML, right? And head is parent to title. So title is a child of head. So some tags are both parent and child. Like your parents were also children once, right? Cool. And that's just the basic idea, is that HTML is a nested structure. So you put things inside things, inside things, inside things, until it goes on. So if we want to actually build something that's more like a website here, we might be using something like let's just do a div right now. So a div is just like a kind of like a generic wrapper. So it's something that you put around stuff when you don't have something that's more specific than a div to use. So if you know beforehand that I'm going to put text inside this stuff, and I'm only going to put text in there, then you should be using a paragraph. And if you know that you're going to put an image in there, then you should be using an image tag. But if you are going to put multiple things inside there, and it's going to be block level, I'll revisit that in a minute, then you probably want to use a div to put around it. So if you want to put both text and an image, then you should probably be using a div. So here's some text, and I think I can actually remember the URL to the cat. No, I could not. It's here. So yeah. So I just told you that a div is block level. So what does block level mean? I think the best way to explain that is probably by putting something underneath the div. So here is some more text, and I need to open the file again. Okay, so here is some text, is a paragraph, then you have the image, and then underneath that here is some more text. But now if we maybe it's easier to show it with text. So I think here is even more text. Yeah, I think I'll do that, and then I'll remove the image again because it takes up so much space. And then we refresh. So you can see now we have some paragraphs that are underneath each other. But what if I wanted this one to be on the same line as this one? So maybe just try doing like this. No, that doesn't work. HTML doesn't really care about when I like line breaks, right? I already told you that. So how about the thing is that the p tag is a block level tag, the same way that a div is a block level tag. So if I replace the p tag with something that's not a block level tag, then we'll have a solution to this. And tag that's not block level is a span, for instance. Damn it. Yeah, I think actually a block level tag will not sit next to a, so I think both of them have to be spans. Yeah, so this works. So the point about a block level tag is that it always makes sure to sit on a new line, not to sit on next to anyone else. But the problem is span is not really is not really telling us that this is a text element. So we also need to keep that in the back of the mind. Um, so that actually comes a little bit into the territory of talking about semantics. And we actually plan to cover that later, but I think we need to have the idea a little bit up there already. So the idea about semantics is that you should not try to do all kind of weird tricks with your HTML in order to make your website look in a certain way. The most important thing is to think about the data that you have and then use the appropriate tags for that data. So if you use a p tag, then use the p tag to present text. Don't use a p tag and then immediately after put an image inside and then not put any text inside of that. If that was the case, then I would maybe use a div if I really need to have something around it, or maybe the image tag could have been sitting there on its own. Yeah, but I think we covered nesting, parents, children. So let's see what we need to. Then we have attributes. So we already used attributes a little bit, and we did that when we were doing the image here. So you can see this one, source, that's an attribute. Alt is an attribute, and maybe we should try to find the documentation for the HTML IMG tag so we can understand what this means. I generally recommend trying to avoid the W3 schools. They have some pretty easy readable material, but sometimes there might be some mistakes in it. So I prefer to go to this one. It's the Mozilla for documentation. So here they explain how the IMG tag works. And here they describe the attributes. Just zoom in a little bit. Huh?
What website is it?
Right now it's developer.mozilla.org. Alt, this attribute defines an alternative text description of the image, an alternative text description of the image. So if you can watch an image, just have a look at the image. Why do you need a text description of that image as well?
If image is don't download it.
Okay, so if you can't see the image yet, yeah, might be broken, might be slow, something like that, yeah?
Then you have description.
More details for the image, like if you to know where you are using and why you're using this image.
The alt tag is not like text that's displayed under the image, but
It's for accessibility as well for the people who cannot see and
Yeah.
read.
that's a very good point, because we are also, it's not all users that are using the web that can actually see. There are a lot of users who cannot see. So what do you know? What people who are blind, how they use the web?
They read here the reading
Yeah.
stuff. So.
Have you seen anyone do that? Do you know of anyone? Or?
I know.
Okay, yeah. It's very fascinating.
Yeah.
Usually they have it on a very, very high speed. So it goes like, this attribute defined or something like that. And I have no idea how they can understand what's being said. But they actually, if the website is structured in an appropriate way, they're actually able to navigate the website and use it almost like a normal people with normal vision. So that's another reason that the alt tag is fairly important. Another reason is that the alt tag actually helps with search engine optimization. So that will help your image show up on, for instance, Google image search and if your image shows up on Google image search, then there's a there's a likelihood that that will generate some traffic from people looking for that image and then coming to your website. So that's another thing to think about. These attributes here are not so commonly used. Then there's something here, height. So you can set the height of an image. Source. This is the one that we were using before. So this is the image URL. And this one is mandatory for the IMG element. So, you know, if you're going to make an image, it doesn't make sense to set an image tag without actually defining a source for the image, because then there isn't an image. So that's why it's mandatory. Makes sense. It's also explaining that there's an attribute called source set. I won't go so much into detail with that one, but it's just that if you have devices that have like different pixel densities, so some phones might have like really high resolution, and then you might want to load a image in a higher resolution for certain devices when they have like high enough pixel density. You can use source set for that. But it's a little more of an advanced topic. And then we have width down here. Height and width, I think they're pretty self-explanatory. But a good strategy is to only define one of them. If you define the width, then it will figure out the height for you without like stretching the image, because you quite often when you see people doing HTML for the first time, you see these images that are like stretched out completely, and that's typically because people think that, okay, so I'll just like tell it what should the height be and what should the width be. But if the image is like normal 16:9 ratio, so it's 16 wide and 9 high, and you give it a different width height correlation, then it will actually like squash the image or stretch the image in some way. So the trick is only to set the width, and then it should maintain. But what I wanted here is just to show you how you can find some documentation about the different HTML tags. So this was an example of the IMG tag. Maybe we could search for something like the main tag. That's here. Here it tells us the main element represents the dominant content of the body of a document. So it's the dominant content of the body. So okay, so if we have something where we want the important parts, let's say that this image down here is not important, but all the other stuff is important, then we put it like this. Generally on a website like this, what you use the main for is like all the stuff here in the article, all the reading area, and then this thing out here is typically outside main. That might be in something called an aside, for instance. Yeah. Cool. So I dived into your topic a little bit already about semantic elements.
Yeah, it's okay, no worries.
So, but maybe, did you want to continue from here?
Yeah, sure. Should I do it on this computer if you want to keep recording?
Yeah, that might be the right way. Yeah. So you did some examples already?
Yeah, I just did an example.
Just put it on Slack.
Yeah.
And remember to post it as a snippet. You're just in class 8, so they have that as well. Yeah. Cool. So should I just copy it into the same file maybe?
Yeah, that's fine. Okay. So, did you have the file open in the browser?
Yep. So if you do like 4 fingers up, then it does this zoom
Oh,
thing.
okay.
And like this. I don't know if I saved it. Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay, so a little bit about semantics. Saki talked a little bit about it already. Can you see the code, or should we zoom in a little bit?
I think it's all right.
It's okay. So semantics provides some tags that makes the naming conventions easier in HTML. So we talked a little bit about child and parent elements before. So if you take a look here, up here we have something called a nav tag. And this provides the navigation bar you see up here. This is a very simple one. But in here we have some A tags, which stands for articles, which links to other files that you have, other HTML files. So
It's not article, but anchor.
oh yeah, anchor, I'm sorry. So the semantic tag here, nav, you could use something like a div, but since we have this tag available, it makes it easier to see what we're actually doing. So I just wrote a comment up here saying navigation bar, and when we have the nav tag, it makes it easier to see that this is what actually is the navigation bar. So you can divide your code into like different sections. So when we have the navigation bar section here, we know that this is like the navigation bar, and we don't want to do anything with it. If we had to like make a div for everything and make IDs with it when we want to add like some styling, or if we want to change something, then like the navigation tag makes it easier to find it again. And if another programmer, like we spoke about before, wants to take over your code, he knows that the nav tag is only used for navigation bar. It's only used for that purpose. Where if you have something like a div, which is like a more universal tag, it could have several meanings. It could be used in several instances. So as we see up here, there's like a navigation bar. Then we have like the header part, and in here we have the h1 tag, which is a header tag. So usually there's like, you can see down below here, I use h2. H1 is used for like the primary like title, the heading of a page. So this is just like some sample data. It says, what does WWF do? So usually when you go to a web page, you see like the navigation bar at the top, and then you see a heading which presents what this website is about. So a good convention could be to wrap like the heading part in a header tag, so you know that like before, like this is the actual header part, so it's unique. And in here you could have different things. So in this example we just have a heading here which says, what does WWF do, which is like, yeah, the heading. And then below we have like a p tag, but it's still wrapped in the header tag, so we know it's part of the header still. So if I took this out, for example, let's say we added some styling to the header, so the heading of the page will look in a specific way. It's important that we wrap all our elements in the header tag. So everything we want to be inside of the header should be in it, so like the styling applies. There's also another tag called section, which is like what we have down here. This could be used in several instances. This is like just a short, brief description of WWF. And here we use the H2 tag. This could also be a H1 tag, but usually you want to rank the heading tags, which is like the heading of a section of the page, of the importance of the heading. So obviously, like the heading of the actual web page has like a higher rate of importance than the H2 tag. So let's say we had one section here called WWF, which would explain a little bit more, and then maybe we could add another one for another organization or similar. Then it could have the same code. It could also have an H2 tag if they were ranked by importance, like on a similar level. There's also H3 and H4 and H5, which are used for like things that are less important. So I actually also wanted to
So maybe we can just pray again.
Yeah.
So one thing that you've been saying is that the H1 is the most important.
yeah
So there's a convention. So there's this convention that usually you only want to have one H1 on each page, because then you kind of like know what is like the main thing on this page, and that's something that Google use a lot for search engine optimization. But also about like when you use H2, H3, and H4 and so on, it's good. It's a correct practice to always have like if you do it in H3, it should be within the section where you have an H2. So it's not like you have like maybe you can show it as an example. So if you want to use an H3, it should be somewhere under that H2 there, right?
Yeah, so maybe for example, you could have some text like this, for example, and then below it, maybe there would be like another smaller header which would mark like a heading of the article or the section in general. So,
So we can't begin next section with H3 header?
No, generally, you should, well, you can, but something like Google will understand your document based on things like also which heading sizes you choose, like H2, H3, H4. So if you start the next section with an H3, it might be like confused. So is this still part of the previous section? Of course, if you have like a div around it or something like that, we'll probably understand that it's not part of that section. But generally, you want to make sure that that you have like a nesting hierarchy of your headings. So H2, H3, 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 H2, H3, H3, H4, back to H2, and so on and so on. Kind of the same way as if you're using in a Word document, that you have like you can choose different section headers and things like that. But actually, so this is just like a practice that's good to know in terms of like being discovered on Google. But the point that I want to drive home is you should not be using H2, H3, H4, and so on to make your document look nice. We're going to learn how to do that with CSS. So instead, when you're writing HTML, think about structure. Yeah, exactly. Always think about the structure. Make sure that the things are nested correctly and everything is just like structured right. And if it's structured right, it's much easier to write the CSS that makes it look good. Because it's very common that if you see like someone made a design for you in Photoshop maybe, and then you have a heading there, and then you have one that's smaller and one that's smaller and so on. Then you might just use like heading 1, heading 2 for the smaller ones, heading 3 for the even smaller ones, heading 4 for the smallest ones. But sometimes you need to think about the hierarchy of things. And you might have a heading that's smaller, but it's in a completely different section, so it might actually still be an H2, even though the H2s are a different size some other places in the page. Structure is the main important thing.
What is the importance of the H1 to put in the header tag?
It doesn't really have to be in the header tag. It's more important that you only have one H1 on the page, because that's something that that Google is looking after. Where is the main H1? And to be honest, I'm not even completely sure how much this is up to date, because like the Google search algorithm tips and tricks are changing all the time. But overall, I still think it's a good structure to keep in mind, that you have like one main H1. That's kind of like if you're writing a paper in Word document, that's like the main title of your Word document. And then when you start doing headings under that, that might be H2s. And then maybe you have like a little section that's like just a comment to one of the existing sections. That's where you use an H3. And quite often you only get into like using maybe H3, maybe H4 if it's like really crazy, but you usually don't go down to like H6 or 7 or something like that. Then there's something wrong usually. So.
And just to clarify, like this header tag is not necessary. You could also just delete it and just have the H1 like standalone. The reason we use these tags to wrap it is because if we wanted to add something more in the header, we know where it is. So for example, if we would add another P tag here, for example, we would write to save the world, for example. The mission is to save the world. And then we would save it and go back here. Then we added another P tag, but it's still in the header section. So these like semantic tags here is just to divide your code into like sections, so it's easier for you to say, oh, if like for example, if we delete this, then we have the H1, so that's a good indicator that's like on the top of the page, like the most important heading. But if we didn't have the heading tag, it would be kind of hard to figure out like what section does this belong to, because a lot about the structure in HTML as well is like dividing your code into sections. So when you have like the navigation bar, that's like a standalone. That's like a component of your code. So you don't want any other HTML element to interfere. So it's just a way for the developers to structure and organize the code.
What about main tag? Should it be like the first one and then header and then section and then header and section inside main? Or
Yeah, I
the
think
header main.
typically it kind of depends on the layout of the site. I think typically a header would be outside of main, but technically it could be inside main as well.
It depends on the site.
Yeah.
It also depends a little bit on the conventions. I think usually, I agree with Sagi, usually like the heading and the navigation bar something would not be part of the main, because that's like,
A site.
yeah, that's a site, exactly. So yeah, I would also provide some pictures here where you could use something like the figure tag, which is like if you have some sort of graphics, in this case a picture, or like you had a component or a part of your page that showed like a map or something, you could have like a figure tag to show like here's some graphics, because graphics can also act different than text can. So it would be nice to be aware that here's like some text that takes up a certain part of the web page, so we want text to align to a certain site or like behave differently in regards to this picture. And I think we already went over like how the image works.
But the fig caption is actually quite interesting.
Oh yeah, that's right. So you
in
can
that
see.
context, because we touched on the alt text, right? So the alt text is mainly for showing when the image is not loaded yet and it's consumed by screen readers. But that fig caption there, I think that's what you were like looking for. That's actually the text that typically sits under an image in a newspaper, maybe, explaining that this is where this and that happened, and the guy on the left is this guy, and stuff like that. For that you use fig caption. And because all of this is wrapped inside a figure, then you kind of like that tells us that the fig caption belongs to the image. So the fig caption is a description of the image.
But the image is itself an image. So what is the difference between image and figure?
So figure is a more generic term. So maybe an image on the web is typically, it could be a JPEG image, could be a PNG image or something like that. But maybe you could have like something that's being interactively drawn on the page. So it's not an image, it's some graphics that's being drawn on the page for you, and it's showing maybe like an infographic or something like that.
For like
that would
Google
still
Maps
be a
example.
figure, but it's not an image. It's not a JPEG image or PNG or something like that. It's being drawn as you see it.
Yeah, like for example, if you had like a Google Maps something, then it's not an image, but it's like an active component. Then it would also go under the figure caption.
Good example as well.
So yeah, and then we have like the footer tag, which is usually, I think most web pages have this in some sort, where it's like at the bottom there's like some credits or some links or something. So definitely like something like the footer tag usually goes to the bottom of the page. So of course you also want to place it at the bottom of the code here. I added some, you can see like there's like a black border around it, which is some CSS, which we're going to get into in a little bit. But here's actually something that's quite exciting. I mentioned before, like the anchor tag is used to like navigate around web pages. Here we have something like called contact information, and this just like it has just like a random email address here. But actually, it has like an anchor tag that references to this email address. So there's something called mail to, which is like a keyword in HTML. So actually, we can try and click it like this. Oh,
I don't know why that happened.
yeah.
But
Okay. The idea is that.
But generally, when
yeah.
you press a mail to link, it will open your email client, and yeah.
Yeah.
But I think it's maybe a good idea not to open my email
Yeah.
client.
I'm sorry.
but-
I'm sorry.
but,
I didn't mean that. I'm sorry.
I don't think there's any
It
problems,
works
but
at my computer.
Oh, okay.
It's open.
So yeah, maybe it's time for the break now.
yeah, I think it's time for the break. So there should be some food out there. Maybe a quick question.
Yeah, last question. I read a lot about it, and most of the developers they recommend that we don't use any CSS inline. Is like making sense
We'll
about
talk
this?
about that after
Okay.
the break.
Ja.
Okay.
Cool.
Det er ikke for at åbne alle dine private
Nej.
e-mails, der er her.
Men lad os lige pause.
Ja.
Det er sådan en klasse, kan man tage ind til at optage, og så
Ja, så er der bare gået en halv time med ingenting.